Good morning, everyone. On today's CHRO series, I will be speaking with Lynette Noble. Lynette has held many senior-level HR positions throughout her career and has founded the Noble Leadership Institute that has enabled her to become a leader of leaders in HR to help teams and organizations achieve their highest potential. Lynette, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
So during these podcast series, we have been discussing what it takes to become a successful HR leader. To take it one step further, how should HR leaders be addressing internally and externally of the protests?
You know, that's a great question. We are in some really interesting times, and I think there's a realization that the racial tension that has gone on in the community is just not relegated to the streets. And I think business people are beginning to speak openly about the conditions around both institutional and systematic racism that really has existed for years, and how might their organizations be contributing to this, or if they're how might this be living within their organizations? So there's really a reckoning at this point that this is a situation that is seriously impacting our communities and the people that we employ. And what is really, really interesting is that you've seen some organizations, and I would say a majority of organizations have come through with these really bold statements that I'm not sure we've seen this many in the past, but they come through with these really bold statements as to how they want to support Black Lives Matter to a certain extent, and how they're going to really start thinking about how to end racism in this subject matter. The one thing that is really interesting is as they've come out with these very bold statements, it's clear that they have to respond with some action. And I've had several people reach out to me because they know it's the right thing to do, but they just don't know how to respond. Because they need to respond promptly with something to make sure that people understand that this is just not words, that it will be different this time, that things will change. And they also know that, for the members of the Black and Brown community, this is not new to us. So, often people say, well, how are you? Well, I think there's got to be an understanding that this deeply impacts us all. And it deeply impacts us in the African American and Brown and Black communities as well. And I think there's a realization that organizations just could not be silent, because that would have been viewed as inaction. And one of the questions people need to start asking is, what do people need? How do we support them? How does it feel? And this is where the HR leader becomes really impactful and important in the conversation, as well as our change management professionals, executive coach, leadership practitioners. We all play, I think, a really key role, because in order to engage and really understand what's going on, you have to be able to create a space to engage in some really some conversations that are likely going to be awkward around disparities stemming from racism and differences and biases. And really, it's upon us to help create an environment where, a safe environment where you can engage in these critical conversations with your organizations. Because oftentimes, if you're not able to engage in critical conversations, conversations where you can sit and not become overly defensive or, overgeneralization is when you're going to get to the root of the matter. And when you create this safe environment for your employee base, and for your Brown and Black community, understanding that, these are obstacles that they face both inside and outside of the workplace. You need to reaffirm that there's safety in the person, and that their personhood matters. Because that's, one of the things that they've talked about is, this issue around systemic racism and institutional racism. The underlying theme is a less than type of thing, and making sure that people, that you're able to acknowledge it and say, okay, but that's, this is a conversation I think is ripe for having, and it's time to engage.
And why is it so important to address it in a timely manner?
I think part of the challenge is if you don't, you're viewed as not acting or not caring or being somewhat colorblind to what's going on. And, this is an issue that, it's one of those things, you think about, 3 weeks when this all started, when the protest started. So many things have happened since then that continues to highlight that if we don't address it, it's only going to continue to get worse. Now, the good thing is that I think people are really looking internally and saying, okay, this is not an issue that's just not the responsibility of our brown and black communities. And I think you can't simply rely on it because, this is really about changing a culture and creating habits of inclusion within your organization. And in order to have those transformations, it has to be owned by all, not just one, not just a senior leadership, but owned by all. Because when you think about cultural transformation, it's all about engaging in shared habits and behaviors throughout your whole organization. So, why now? Why you have to be timely? One, to make sure that your organization understands that you're listening to them. So one of the things that we say is that when things like this happen and we're trying to figure out solutions, you first have to listen. Then you're in a position to unite together as a team around shared goals, and then you're definitely in a position to act boldly. And this is like a call to action. This is a time that it's important to act boldly, according to what you've said.
Do you have any other advice for HR leaders when addressing these issues?
I think one of the things that becomes interesting is that, it's all the things that we're talking about around these dialogues are really about how do you make sure you have sound leadership principles within your organization. So, it's all about ensuring that, yes, how can your organization engage in active, deep dialogue? Do they have the courage to start challenging the assumptions, biases, and behaviors? Can they be vulnerable enough to understand that answers not readily available? Are they able to understand different perspectives and fight the urge to rationalize or defend situations that are not like their view of the world? And really, it's one of those things, taking the opportunity to really listen, allowing yourself to sit in another person's experience, and ask, how might you feel? How might you feel if you had been treated in a certain way? And it's really this ability to understand various perspectives that allow you to engage in, and it's more of just not HR leaders, but organizations being able to understand the various perspectives that allows you to engage in these shared goals. And, it's one of those things, it's going to be hard, it's going to be uncomfortable, but you have to engage with grace. And, the other thing is, remember that this journey is long. Systemic racism has been around and institutional racism has been around for a very long time, and it's not going to be cured overnight. So it's one of those things, how do we commit to continue to engage and recommit into the process, even in our successes and failures? And, one of those things, and, one of the things that has been happening most recently is as they've engaged in dialogues, many organizations have come out and made some really, had said, Quaker Oats yesterday came out and said, we really need to start looking at how the Aunt Jemima brand is impacting people, our brown and black communities. What is very interesting is that if you're able to cultivate the ability to have those crucial conversations within your organization, those things will come to a head before you have to act on it in the way in which we've had to act on these things now. Because if you're able to have that dialogue and build that safe environment for people to engage in the discussion, I'm sure these type of things will come up. So it's one of those things when, as we go through this journey, things will continue to bubble up, and everybody can sit back and say, well, yeah, we knew that. But the question has to be, is like, if we knew that, how come we weren't able to address it? And get curious around that.
Well, Lynette, it was a pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with the HR community. It really was a pleasure.
Thank you so much.